Title: The Inferno Beneath. The Cursed Town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, USA. Chapter 1. The Smoldering Curse. The air in Centralia, Pennsylvania, was always thick with an unsettling quiet. In the 1960s, the town was bustling with miners, families, and local shops. But beneath the streets, an inferno was brewing, a fire that would turn this once thriving town into a ghostly wasteland. The residents had no idea what horror lay ahead. One autumn afternoon, young Timmy Hargrove was playing in the woods behind his house. The forest was dense, but Timmy knew it well. His parents had warned him to stay clear of the old mine entrances scattered across the landscape. Those dark holes led to the deep underground tunnels where miners extracted coal, and now they were abandoned and dangerous. But on this day, Timmy wasn't paying attention. As he ran, laughing, his foot slipped and the ground beneath him crumbled. He fell, tumbling down a steep hill until he landed on a cold, metallic grate. Beneath the grate, Timmy could see a faint orange glow. The smell of sulfur filled his nose, burning his throat. Suddenly, a hand shot up from the grate, blackened and charred, its fingers curling around the bars. Timmy screamed. He scrambled backward, his heart pounding in terror as more hands began to claw their way up from the grate, their bodies twisted and mangled from the fire below. He ran as fast as he could, his legs trembling beneath him, until he reached his house. But from that day on, Timmy wasn't the same. The town's elders whispered about the curse of the mines, the fire that had been smoldering for years, and the souls trapped beneath the earth. But no one wanted to believe in such things, until the fire spread and Centralia began to burn from the inside out. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Streets. By the 1970s, smoke began to rise from the cracks in Centralia's streets. The once sturdy asphalt had become soft, splitting open to reveal the burning underworld beneath. But it wasn't just the fire that unsettled the remaining residents. It was the strange disappearances. Frank O'Malley, one of the few miners left in town, was the first to notice. Every morning, as he made his way to the local diner, the roads seemed different. Entire sections of town were vanishing, not just physically, but from memory. One day, an entire block of houses that had stood for decades was gone. No rubble, no debris, just empty fields of scorched earth. What happened to the Johnsons' house? Frank asked the waitress at the diner, his brow furrowed. The Johnsons? Never heard of them, she replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. But Frank knew them. He had been friends with John Johnson for years, shared drinks at the local bar, and watched their kids play together. Yet, as he pressed others about the vanished family, blank stares and shrugged shoulders were all he received. It was as if the Johnsons and their entire block had never existed. That night, Frank walked through the streets, determined to uncover the truth. As he approached the old playground where the children used to gather, he saw something. Standing at the edge of the woods was a figure, a shadow of a person, barely visible through the smoke rising from the cracked earth. He called out, but the figure remained still, watching. Frank stepped closer, and the ground beneath him gave way. He fell hard, landing in a tunnel deep below the surface. The heat was unbearable, and as he tried to scramble out, he heard whispers. Voices echoed through the darkness, calling his name. When he finally emerged, the town was gone. Centralia was swallowed whole by the inferno beneath, leaving only Frank to tell the tale. Chapter 3. The Phantom Whispers. In the following months, Centralia became a ghost town. Most of the residents had fled, leaving their homes behind. But those who remained began to hear things, soft, disembodied voices echoing through the foggy streets at night. One such resident was Mary Conway, a widow who refused to leave her family's home. Her husband had worked in the mines, and she had vowed to stay until the fire claimed her too. One evening, as Mary sat by her window, knitting by the flickering candlelight, she heard it, the voice of her late husband, calling her name. At first, she thought it was a dream, but as the nights wore on, the voice grew louder, more insistent. "Mary, It whispered, "Come to me." It wasn't just her husband's voice, though. She began to hear the voices of others. Children laughing, mothers scolding their young, miners singing old work songs. Yet when she looked outside, the streets were empty. Unable to ignore the calls any longer, Mary followed the voices. They led her through the charred streets, past crumbling buildings and abandoned homes. The deeper she went into town, the hotter the air became. The smell of smoke filled her lungs, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. She found herself at the edge of a massive fissure, a deep, fiery crack in the earth. The voices echoed from below, calling her, begging her to join them. As she stood at the edge, her heart racing, she saw their faces, twisted and burnt, reaching up from the flames. They were the miners, her husband among them, forever trapped in the burning underworld beneath Centralia. Chapter 4. The Church on the Hill. The one place untouched by the fire was the old church on the hill. For years, it stood as a beacon of hope in the dying town. People would gather there, praying for salvation, for an end to the inferno consuming their homes. But something about the church was wrong. Father Michael, the priest who had served the community for decades, was known for his fiery sermons. He preached about judgment, about the wrath of God, and about the fires of hell. But as the town burned, his sermons became darker, more foreboding. Rumors began to spread that Father Michael had made a pact with something evil. Some said he had summoned the fire himself, calling upon dark forces to cleanse the town of its sins. Others whispered that the church's bell tower was a gateway to the underworld, and that the souls of the dead were trapped beneath it. One night, a group of brave townsfolk decided to confront the priest. They climbed the hill, armed with nothing but courage and a few old lanterns. As they approached the church, the ground beneath them rumbled, and a thick, black smoke began to rise from the earth. Father Michael stood at the entrance, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice low and menacing. Before anyone could react, the church's bell began to toll, and the earth opened up, swallowing them whole. Chapter 5. The Endless Night. The town of Centralia had been abandoned for months now. A thick, suffocating fog clung to the streets, and the sky above was always clouded with ash and smoke, blocking out the sun. The fires beneath the town burned brighter than ever, but something else had taken hold of the remaining few who stayed, an unnatural darkness. Tommy Moore, a young man who had once been determined to stay behind and rebuild his family's home, was now trapped in a never-ending night. It had been days, maybe weeks, since he had last seen daylight. The sun simply refused to rise over Centralia, leaving the town in an eternal twilight. As Tommy walked through the empty streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He had been hearing strange noises at night, footsteps behind him, whispers in the dark, and the sound of something scraping against the walls of the buildings. But no matter how quickly he turned around, there was never anything there. One night, as Tommy was searching for supplies in an old, abandoned grocery store, he heard a low, guttural growl coming from the back of the store. His heart pounded in his chest as he slowly moved toward the sound, gripping a rusted pipe he had found earlier. The back of the store was pitch black, the darkness so thick it seemed to swallow the weak beam of his flashlight. He stepped forward, his breath shallow, and froze when he saw it, two glowing eyes staring back at him from the darkness. They were too large to belong to any animal he had ever seen, and they were getting closer. Without thinking, Tommy turned and ran, his footsteps echoing through the empty store. The growling grew louder, more aggressive, and he could hear whatever was following him crashing through the aisles behind him. He sprinted out into the street, but the night outside was just as oppressive. He glanced back, but the thing, whatever it was gone. Only silence remained, but the darkness seemed even heavier now, as if the night itself was alive, hunting him. Chapter 6. Ashes of the Past. By now, most of the buildings in Centralia had collapsed or been consumed by the fire beneath the earth. Only a few structures remained, their charred skeletons standing as grim reminders of what the town once was. Among them was the old library, a place that had always held a special significance for Sarah Lewis, one of the last remaining residents. Sarah had been the town librarian for decades, and even as Centralia crumbled around her, she refused to abandon the knowledge stored within its walls. She believed the town's history held the key to understanding the curse that had befallen them. The library, though damaged by the fire, still stood, its walls blackened but intact. One afternoon, while sorting through old records and maps, Sarah stumbled upon something unusual, a dusty old book, bound in cracked leather, hidden deep within a forgotten section of a library. The title was faded, but as Sarah opened it, a strange, heavy feeling washed over her. The pages contained detailed descriptions of the town's early history, but more disturbingly, they also spoke of ancient rituals and symbols, rituals performed by the town's founders, involving the very coal that had once been Centralia's lifeblood. According to the book, the fires beneath Centralia weren't a natural occurrence. They were summoned. The founders, in their greed for wealth from the coal mines, had invoked something dark and ancient, a fire spirit that would grant them endless riches, but at a terrible cost. The spirit demanded sacrifices, and for decades, the town secretly appeased it by offering up the lives of miners in carefully staged accidents. But when the sacrifices stopped, the spirit unleashed its fury, igniting the mines and damning the town forever. Sarah realized with horror that the fire wasn't just burning coal, it was burning souls. The miners, the townspeople, even the children, they were all trapped in the flames, their spirits fueling the eternal inferno beneath the town. Desperate to put an end to the curse, Sarah scoured the book for any clue that could stop the fire. But there was only one way, a final sacrifice. The last descendant of the town's founders had to willingly offer themselves to the fire to appease the spirit. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the truth. She was the last descendant. Torn between her fear of death and her duty to the town, Sarah made her decision. That night, she made her way to the largest fissure in the ground, the spot where the fire burned brightest. With the ancient book in hand, she recited the words from the ritual, feeling the ground tremble beneath her. The flames rose higher, as if the spirit was responding to her call. As the fire closed in around her, Sarah whispered her final words, "I release you." The flames engulfed her, but for the first time in years, the fire began to dim. The earth stopped trembling, and the smoke began to clear. Centralia, at last, was quiet. Chapter 7: The Aftermath. In the years that followed, Centralia became a ghost town. Few dared to visit, and those who did never stayed long. The fires beneath the earth had finally died out, but the scars they left behind were permanent. The town streets were cracked and blackened, its buildings reduced to rubble. Yet for the first time in decades, there was peace. No one knew what had happened to Sarah, but those who visited the site of the final fissure reported strange occurrences, voices in the wind, whispers carried on the breeze, and the faint glow of embers beneath the surface. Some say that Sarah's spirit still lingers, watching over the town, ensuring that the fire never rises again. But the curse of Centralia, Pennsylvania, USA, would never be forgotten. The town had been consumed by its own greed, its people sacrificed to a fire they could not control. And though the flames had been extinguished, the memory of the inferno beneath would live on forever. The land was declared uninhabitable, and the remaining few who stayed slowly moved on, leaving behind only empty streets and the charred remnants of a once thriving town. Centralia, forever marked by its curse, would remain a silent, eerie reminder of the price paid for greed and the power of the ancient forces that had been awakened. And so, the story of Centralia passed into legend, a town swallowed by fire, haunted by its past, and forever cursed by the inferno beneath.